or check config on, or?
Well,
or
you'll
service?
have to add
Does it have a service?
Yep. I can't remember.
Oh, okay.
You may have to make one. I think I'm just doing kicking mine out of RC local every time.
Can't open.
So, welcome back. This is our last little sprint here for Adhearsion Comp. Amazingly, I think like everybody's still here except for a couple people that couldn't make it. So, anyway, we're going to have a couple more little talks. Eric Lindvall from CloudVox and If by Phone is going to give us a little thing he likes to call adhesion tricks. Eric.
Well, thank you. So this is just kind of a quick collection of things that I realized I may be doing slightly differently than other people and just thought they could be interesting. So I'm going to be going over Gem Bundler and just the basics of how to do that. There's some more advanced stuff that please come talk to me when you want to get into that. How to test components, how to manage adhesion with God, so if and when it does stop running, you can make it start again, and how to use Capistrano. So, first of all, you just have to install the bundler gem. It'll go through and then create a new bundle file when you call init, and then that is the least that you have to do to say, I want to run adhesion. Once you've done that, just tell it install that, which in this case you probably already had adhesion installed, and so it will be able to grab it from the system, make sure that it's there, and include whatever other dependencies are needed. Now what's cool about that is that it will make sure that all of those versions are there, and you should look into using bundle lock so that when you then go to deploy it, production has the same version of the stuff that you had. Now, another nice side effect of Bundler is, I'm sure most of you have run into that great active support already loaded the wrong version, you can't actually start this thing. Using Bundler goes through and makes sure that it has a single set of dependencies that maps it all out. So even if you had the wrong version of, or not wrong, but multiple versions of Active Record loaded or installed, and you say, I want to use Active Record with adhesion, it would go through and make sure that you're not using the active support 3.0 or whatever else, that everything lines up and matches, because adhesion doesn't work with the 3.0 stuff. So it's totally awesome. It saves you so much headache. And then running your app is very simple. You just run bundle exec and the arguments that you would have run before. And that goes through, as long as you're running it in a directory of the gem file, it uses that, sets up the environment, and you're off and running. And I mean, there's literally nothing more to it. So the thing that I keep on doing is create a little rake task that does that for you so you don't have to. And you'll notice there that I'm using exec instead of sh. The main reason for that is that later on, if you are using God to manage it, if you use sh, you'll have a rake process that's running between that and ahn, and you can't then properly manage things like the memory usage, auto restart stuff that God has. So that exec little trick is helpful in the future.
Can you try using system instead of exec?
It's going to be the same problem because system is spawning a subshell.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a pain in the ass. Now, the other thing that is just the most amazingly great thing ever about using Bundler is inevitably you're going to run into something where there's a bug in adhesion or you just added a feature and it's the middle of the night and nobody's there to go and submit your patch and create a new gem for you and do all that great stuff. You can actually specify a custom Git URL and a branch in your gem file, and it will go and use that. You don't have to package anything. And all it looks like is, here's where it is, here's the reference for it, and the next time you do a bundle install, it grabs that, packages it up in your repository into what would be a gem, but you didn't have to go through making a gem spec, you didn't have to go do anything, and now you're using your special version. And then when those changes are merged in, then you can go back to use the next standard gem, but in the meantime, it just makes a huge world of difference in not having to juggle these sorts of in-between times. Now, next up is a way that I have been using to test components using Mocha. Creating a little test helper that goes through and loads up test unit, loads up Mocha and the component tester. Now this actually is not using RSpec and RR and all that sort of stuff because I was having a little bit of trouble getting it to work right, and it's ended up working just fine. So pretty much all it is instantiate your component, go through and use Mocha to create some stubs that act like a call, go through and expect certain things to be called on that call object, and assuming register was the name of the method on your component that you were passing your call into, just run that and it will go through the flow of the component calling what it should, and you tell it what you want it to respond with. You can use that to do everything from have it throw exceptions, return different things, including how to act inside of blocks, and all sorts of crazy cool stuff there. And clearly this is a simplified case where we're not actually touching a lot of variables, but for some of the tests, it ends up that that variables hash has all sorts of stuff, and you have lots of different calls for those expects lines that will be calling into the variables method to go and get different parameters. You can see the example of the play with, make sure that the specific sound that you thought it was the thing that's being played. Definitely check out Mocha. It's cool stuff, and it makes a lot of this really easy. The first time that I started playing around with this was I wanted to create an Adhearsion app and started it when I was flying back from Chicago, and you have no access to Adhearsion or to Asterisk or anything else, and this allowed me to go through and make sure that the flow was working the way that I wanted. I don't have some dumb syntax errors or whatever else. It is just doing what I intended it to do, and it makes a big difference. And it's a lot faster than having to make a phone call.
Where's that code at?
So you actually put it in your components directory, whatever your component name is, create a directory called test, which I think may already exist, and then create a file that starts with test underscore anything. And when you do that, when you run this rake test component rake task that is included in Adhearsion by default, it goes through, looks in all the component directory for test directories and anything that starts with test underscore, and automatically runs this. So this is something that is built into Adhearsion, which I found I like the way that Rails does it, where if you just run rake, it's going to run your tests. I totally advise putting that in your rake file because it's great. And that's what you want to be doing all the time, is make sure that your stuff isn't broken.
There's not a default rate test right now.
There is not.
We can change that in a few minutes.
Definitely. I don't know if that is the best thing everyone wants, but I sure have found it.
Take a vote on it right now.
Next up is managing Adhearsion with God. It ends up that you can create a little snippet that goes through and says, here's what your app's named. If you want any environment variables, specify the directory you want it to be in when it starts. And that start task that we had back a few slides ago, you can just run rake start. And that, as we had it set up, is going to be running your app inside a bundler. And this here is just doing some very basic stuff. If it died, restart it. But God has all sorts of great abilities to monitor CPU usage, to monitor memory usage, and 1,000 other sorts of things, including if your Adhearsion app, say, had a little Sinatra app that that exposed some stuff, you can actually use God to go and query the HTTP connection, and if it doesn't get a response within a certain time frame after a certain number of times, say something's broken, something's deadlocked, kill the process and try it again.
Michelle and I were talking about the alarms DSL earlier today, and it might be interesting to have God integrate more nicely with Adhearsion, where it could actually trigger an Adhearsion event whenever there's some problem.
I was just thinking the same thing.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
So there is a contacts API that God exposes that allows you to provide different mechanisms of alerting something when different events happen. And so it has everything from email to IM to Campfire to people, including Scout, and just all sorts of different endpoints that you can go and contact things about. And so there's definitely an opportunity to use some of those things to tie that all together. And that's all it takes to run it. Once you have that little bit of Ruby, God-C, it spawns, or it goes into the background, it's running, and if you go and do a PS and grep for your adhesion thing and kill it, 5 seconds later it'll be up and running again. That's all there is to it. So deploying with Capistrano, assuming that we have this God recipe sitting in our repository, pretty much all that we need to do is make it so that it starts God when you do a deploy start, terminates it when you do a deploy stop, and call stop and start again when you do a restart. Pretty simple. And so that is the entirety of your deployment for your Capistrano config. Clearly there's some set your host, do all that crazy stuff, but this will override the standard stuff in Capistrano that is, you know, pretending that you have a Rails project and just making it do your work for your adhesion app. Now, this is pretty cool and all, except that when we restart it, any calls that you had in progress are just going to get terminated halfway through it. And it used to be that Adhearsion didn't have a graceful way to shut down. So even if you did tell it nicely to shut down, it'd just be like, oh, we're done. And I just love this photo. Anyway.
Yeah, but you gotta have good color there. 'cause
I
it's
know,
an
it's
amazing
too bad.
photo, but
It ended up that it only took a few lines to go through and make it so that it waits till the connection count goes to 0 before it shuts down the process, which will allow it to gracefully stop. And that is something that made it into the code base. It is not in the current release, Jim, right?
no, it's in 085 branch though.
Yeah, I believe it's
Okay.
it's
'Cause I
definitely
noticed
0.5. I
it
don't
started
think it's
doing that
0.4.
Yeah.
when I was using 085.
So it's this along with a little bit more code that you can look at that GitHub diff at some point if you're interested in exactly what's going on. But pretty much that's the meat of it. That the first time around it will wait before it stops. If you actually send it a signal the second time, it's like, okay, you really meant it. We'll just.
So when adhesion dies, you're killing the call?
No, by default, we trap it, and it says we're now shutting down, so it changes adhesion into a state of shutdown. And I think it will still accept calls.
Well,
yes.
the part is I've killed adhesion, and if the call's already matched through, it doesn't touch the call.
Well, right, that's still the case. But adhesion, the process won't shut down until all the active calls are 0.
So the problem that you would find is that is true, that adhesion, or the call didn't die, but the call processing would stop.
That's true.
The next step
Processing
would-
stops, and then typically when the call is made, the processing is just a hang up.
So if you're relying on a hang-up event to write a
That-
CDR or something like that, then
We're
you're
not,
probably
yeah.
not gonna write it.
Right.
Or if you have some call processes that are taking 5 or 10 minutes, and you're only 2 minutes into that, and that gets shut down, when you would have gone and played something 3 minutes later to warn them that you're getting to the end of whatever your time.
Do we have a force on this? Because I mean,
Right,
I
the
could go
second.
hours before the call count goes to 0.
The second control C will kill the process. Or
Now,
second kill, whatever it is.
now, in general, when you're deploying this and you want a fault-tolerant production environment, you would probably be putting HA proxy or something like that in front of multiple asterisk instance or adhesion instances. And when you do that, you can go through and just disable or tell HA proxy quit sending calls to this node so that it will start to drain down to 0, will restart, and then you can do the same thing for the other one. And so,
Couldn't you just tell Adhearsion to stop accepting your
yes,
requests during this kind of quiesce period?
Yes.
Or-
It's not there yet, but we should.
it's not there yet, but it definitely, depending on the way that you're deploying things, it definitely would make sense to be a setting that allows you to say, choose between whether or not you want it to continue accepting or start rejecting them and then shut it off. Fortunately, both of those scenarios are very easy to implement with the G-Server stuff. It just ended up that this one was more graceful in a single, if you're only running a single adhesion instance, that it would wait around instead of starting to reject connections until the first one's end. And so now when you run SIGTERM, it'll wait till everything's done. And now we can actually go through into our deploy config, and it's a little bit more complicated, but we can now tell God to quit, tell it to start up again, which means that from one deploy to another, if you changed your God config, like say, added all that great memory limiting stuff, that it would pick up its changes. And then we tell God, send a signal to our application that is term, which makes God just do that. And as soon as the process dies, God sees, oh, it's dead, and restarts again. And now this cap deploy restart is much more seamless to your users. That's about it. So
Very cool.
if anybody has any questions or anything.
Was all good?
Yeah, that was fantastic. Do we want to just maybe go right into to Ben's roadmap?
Well, I had a question.
Oh, yeah.
Have you found adhesion ever to stop? Mine's never stopped.
What do you mean never stop?
I never needed God because it never quit. No, I like the way you're doing the management stuff, but
I've
I've never had it just die.
I don't ever trust any process that I have any control over to never die. It's just,
So the question was, has it ever stopped for you? Never just died?
I don't recall a time.
Maybe I'm just writing too small of adhesion apps or something. I don't know. But.
I don't recall a time that. No, I can't think of a time. But
Okay.
honestly, now I wouldn't necessarily even know as much because it's going to be right back up again.
Yeah, I want to talk to you more offline about
but-
that. So cool stuff. What you're
But
doing.
yeah, it's I haven't really had any problems with it, but that in general, I feel much more comfortable with my deployment when I know that if something catastrophically bad does happen, then I have a way to solve it. And it's also great because of some of the stuff that I didn't show off with. If you did something bad and you start to have a process that is leaking memory, it's a convenient way to have that cleanup happen automatically. And again, I haven't run into that problem with my Adhearsion apps. It's much more common with Rails apps and stuff like that. But either way, as people build more and more complicated Adhearsion apps, there's more opportunities for you to do bad things or to include a gem that is doing bad things. And it just is something that makes me feel more comfortable with my deployments to be able to have that there. And it really helps to tie it into Capistrano.
Cool.
Oh, and actually one other side thing is that I've found that using God to manage the demonization of Adhearsion has caused me less problems than trying to use the internal Adhearsion demonizer.
Yeah.
That there have been some times where weird things happen
That I
and
believe.
some file descriptors aren't reopened or whatever the way that maybe they should be. That this has just been something that avoids a lot of those problems and gives me a lot of flexibility for things like what environment variables I want to be passed in to the process and that sort of stuff as well.
Okay.
Anyone else?
I think we should start collecting little scripts like this. A lot of projects have a contrib directory. Adhearsion doesn't, but maybe it makes sense to start good plugins in there.
Yeah.
Like Capistrano things,
Yeah.
God things.
Yeah, I want to get this written down and make a screencast on a deployment.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be
So
awesome.
Yeah, I like that idea. It makes a lot of sense.
Eric, can you email the URL of that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks so much, Eric.
So do we want to take a break, or we just want to power
We
through
just
and
got back
jump
like
around?
10 minutes ago.
Should jump
I
in.
know, that's what I'm saying.